Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar from Borderless. We're here today to talk to you all about sponsored worker pay, how to get this right. Now, this is a really big topic, so we're going to be going into a fair bit of detail, and we'll probably be running future webinar sessions all about this as well. Today, we're going to be covering national minimum wage, travel time, staying overnight, and in particular, we're going to be highlighting some of the changes we saw in April 2026. Now, as we know, sponsored worker pay is a really big topic and an area of potential non-compliance. So we're going to be going into all of that in just a little bit. So thank you everyone for joining. By way of introduction, my name is Matthew Bond. I'm the CEO and co-founder here at Borderless. And Borderless, as a very brief introduction, we are technology. We are a team of expert immigration advisors who are able to help you through processes like sponsor license applications, visa applications, COS requests, home office audits, both helping you as a business and also all of your sponsored workers as well. We're really proud to be doing that for a great many businesses across the UK. Lots and lots of visas granted, sponsored workers protected as well. And we'll share a little bit more about Borderless as we go through towards the end of the session today. In the meantime, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Alina, who's going to introduce herself. Over to you, Alina.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alina. I'm an immigration advisor here at Borderless. I've been with Borderless for nearly 2 years now, but I've been in the immigration field for several years. So feel free to send over any questions. And I believe we have a Q&A section at the end as well. So I'll get to it towards the end.
Excellent. Thanks, Alina. So just a little bit of a background for what Borderless is all about if you haven't met Borderless before. So at Borderless, we have a really strong belief in this big mission and vision that we're looking to achieve. And that's to build a world where borders are no longer barriers, where anyone can move anywhere seamlessly and safely. And we typically find that UK businesses and sponsored workers experience a lot of friction when it comes to the UK immigration system in general, right? The system has changed, evolved, especially over the last 3 or 4 years. And that's really why Borderless exists. It's all about simplifying the complexity of immigration for both businesses, individuals working within those businesses, but also critically as well, sponsored workers. And the way we do that is we build technology to make it really easy for you as a business to manage and maintain your home office compliance, to make sure all of your immigration processes get processed accurately and smoothly, and of course for your sponsored workers as well to be able to manage their immigration status and their compliance position too. So that's a little flavor of Borderless, and as I mentioned before, we'll explain a bit more about what we do in the meantime. In terms of today's session, what we're going to be talking about is a lot more detail around sponsored worker pay. So these, as I alluded to at the beginning, can create significant license implications and compliance risks for your business. So we'll be going into all of that in a little bit more detail. We'll also be talking about what changed in April 2026 with those changes to pay bands and salary rates. We'll go into the details there. We're also going to share a lot more of what we see across those 600 plus businesses that we support here at Borderless, where potentially people who are coming to Borderless have tripped up in the past. How do we avoid those trip ups? Where are sponsors typically getting pay and pay discrepancy wrong, which is a really easy way to trip up, and lots of different ways that you could fail to do that. There's also changes to the way that compliance processes, payroll processes work, how the Home Office looks back over different pay periods. So we'll go into a lot of those as well. And then it's all about getting proactive, right? How do you build a robust pay process, audit process? How do you make sure that you're not making those mistakes in the first place, and essentially improving your compliance position and compliance score accordingly? So we'll share a little bit more, as I mentioned towards the end, about how Borderless can help you with all of these processes and how to maintain and manage your compliance on an ongoing basis. Now, if this is the first of the webinars you're doing, we love to keep them really interactive. So there is a public chat, a private chat, and also some poll questions that we have. So do please interact with us as you go through the session today. Feel free to ask us questions in that chat, respond to the polls. It's really helpful for us to be able to calibrate the information that we're bringing you here today, and to of course make sure that future webinars that we do are really useful and engaging for everyone as well. So do introduce yourself and interact with us. Of course, this session is recorded as well. If you go to the Borderless website, you'll probably find, I imagine, 200 plus webinars at this point on topics on all things to do with sponsorship as well, pay being a really important as well, one as well. So if you would like a recording of this session, you can access it from the website. You can also send it to anyone who wasn't able to join today's session or catch up on it later as well. So why is sponsor license, why is pay and pay for sponsored workers a license problem? The key change that we've seen here, which Alina is going to go into more details, essentially, if sponsored worker pay dips below the minimums, the required minimums, then that can actually trigger now a compliance breach, because we're looking actually now over a single pay period. And we'll explain what that means in a little bit more. Number one, so essentially there's a shorter window of time when you can trigger a potential compliance breach. Number two, we're seeing a lot more from the Home Office, HMRC, the Fair Work Agency. There's just a lot going on in government in terms of data systems being connected. So payroll data being shared from HMRC to the Home Office, shared with the Fair Work Agency from an employment law perspective as well. So as you can imagine, these systems become more and more joined up, and it's easier for the government to be able to spot differences, discrepancies across different systems, and essentially connect the dots across different data systems that they're using as well. So that's increasingly a theme we're starting to see. And of course, we see breaches aren't intentional, right? Sponsors don't want to create those compliance problems for themselves. But it can happen very easily, because there is a lot of complexity to the way that pay and salaries work. And of course, if you run your payroll system in a way that it's always been done, and it's not knowledgeable about changing immigration rules, legislation, pay bands, which HR systems typically are not, then that can obviously trigger an unintentional breach and create problems for the business as well. So really important, therefore, to get very active and proactive about where you are monitoring and measuring your compliance position. So I'm going to cover off what changed actually in April 2026. So this is essentially a higher floor and a new way of checking it. So essentially the pay floor went up, as it typically does in April each year. So that's the national minimum wage. It rose across different age bands, which I'm going to show you in a second, effective from the 1st of April. And it's, of course, the main change as well we've seen is the fact that sponsored worker pay is also being checked every single pay period now, not over historic look-back windows, which were a little bit longer. Now we're running on a per pay basis. So a bit more simplicity in terms of how the government are looking at it, but obviously a lot of ways to still make mistakes. And so in a nutshell, really, that does mean that a single low pay period can actually trigger a compliance failure. It's not a case of being able to make it up next month or make it up over those rolling periods. It's now much more every single pay period, every single pay slip needs to be accurate and correct. Now here are the changes to national living wage, just for reference here. So 21 and over, that's £12.71 an hour. 18 to 20, £10.85, and under 18 and apprentices, £8 per hour. And there are various offsets that can be allowed as well, and these are all allowable deductions subject to certain limits. We've listed one of them here, is the accommodation offset. Of course, with these things as well, it's possible to go over these things, and that will actually trigger increases to or decreases to the effective gross rate of pay, which can also trigger compliance breaches as well. So another nature of the complexity of sponsored worker pay. Now remember, of course, that as the rates increased in April, the existing sponsored workers are directly affected, right? So going rates, national minimum wage went up on the 1st of April, and someone who was paid the correct rate in March could be below the line in April. And that's obviously requires no theoretical change on your end. If you didn't make that change, that is potentially a compliance breach. And you're, of course, as an employer, expected to know those changes, know those new rates, and take action before that point in time. And so that's why compliance isn't this static target. It moves every time as the rules and regulations changed. And that floor, of course, has moved in April as well. So I guess the question here to the audience is, how do you currently manage your sponsored worker pay today? What do you do at the moment to make sure that sponsored workers are paid correctly? Now, there's a couple of different ways that we see businesses handling this. It's a check every pay period. So maybe they're scanning pay slips, sampling pay slips or something like that. Perhaps there's some sort of annual review process internally within the company to check that in line with national minimum wage changes. Of course, there are other changes that can happen within a year as well, which of course could affect sponsored worker pay. You're just perhaps you're just running payroll, but you're not really proactively looking at sponsored worker pay as well. Or if you're really not sure about how you are checking sponsored worker pay, or you're not checking it at all, then that's option 4. So let us know how you're currently managing and checking sponsored worker pay is compliant for your organization. I'll just leave that poll up for another 30 seconds or so. So yes, let us know how you're checking sponsored worker pay. Are you looking at it every pay period? Is that for all workers, a number of workers? Are you checking it on a periodic basis, perhaps annually? Are you running payroll, hoping for the best? Or are you not really aware of the rules around sponsored worker pay minimums, etc.? We will say, not to preempt Alina's thunder, that minimum pay salary validation is a huge area of potential non-compliance when the Home Office do audits. Great. Well, thanks everyone for sharing a bit more about that. So we're going to hand over now to Alina to share a lot more practical insight, what we're seeing from UK businesses in the sponsored worker pay realm. Over to you, Alina.
Okay, thank you. So I think basically what Matt has covered up to this point is kind of the easy part, and this next section is basically where all sponsors typically get caught up. So two things that typically decide compliance is what counts towards pay and what counts as paid working time. So in the next sections, I'll be walking you through travel time, sleep-in shifts, whether weekend shifts can be uplifted as premium pay. So basically stay tuned, and this is potentially a really big takeaway as well for you. So in terms of the next slide, so what we'll be covering here is that two pay floors apply for a sponsored worker. Firstly, national living minimum wage for their age band. So that relates to what Matt was speaking about earlier. So if with most workers, they will be over 21. So that means the national living minimum wage there that applies is 12.71 per hour. And for sponsored workers as well, the important thing here is that the going rate for their occupation code also applies. So you need to be monitoring both, and essentially you must clear whichever is the higher of the two in every pay period, not just one or the other. So it's really important to make sure that whichever is higher, that's what's reflected on the worker's pay slips, and that's what you're using to assess if the worker is cleared for that relevant pay period, basically. And I'd say the trap here that most employers fall for is that they think these two floors are applied separately. So often what I've noticed with doing audits and just my observations from customers as well is that their payroll system usually monitors the minimum wage, but not the going rate for the occupation code. And that sometimes we've seen as well that it changes annually. So it's really important to just be up to date on this, as well with all of the national living minimum wage changes that tend to take place every April. And for sponsored roles, again, the going rate is a higher number, so you can comfortably ensure that basically you're paying above minimum wage. And even with that, you can still technically be in breach if the going rate for the occupation code that you've assigned that sponsored worker is higher than the actual minimum wage. So for carers and senior carers, or just overall within the care industry, the carers and the senior carers have their own floor that is actually higher than national living minimum wage. So for any COS that was assigned from the 22nd of July, 2025, you would need to pay them at least 12.82 per hour. And this works out to an annual rate, a minimum annual rate, of 25,000 per year. And that's based on a 37.5 hour week. So that means realistically, if the worker's contracted hours are higher than 37.5 hours, that needs to be prorated accordingly. And that would mean that the annual minimum rate would also increase with that. So it's really important to just apply both floors and make sure you're clearing whichever is the highest, basically. Perfect. Yep. Okay. On to the next slide. So travel time is one of the most common areas that employers slip up on. Even throughout the audits that I've done as well, I noticed that sometimes there's wording in the contracts that say that travel time is not paid, or that it's paid but with different caveats. So I think this slide is really important to just make it really clear in terms of what needs to be paid and what's counted and what's not counted. So with travel time spent traveling between the client's appointments would be considered as working time and must be paid. And this is a really common issue with specifically in the care sector, where sometimes workers are being paid mileage, but it's not specifically travel time. And it's also really important to distinguish that the first commute from the worker's home to the first client and the final journey from the last service user's home to their home basically usually doesn't count as travel time, but everything in between, so any travel back and forth between service users or the office, traveling from one client to the next during the working day would typically count as travel time, and that's what the home office would expect to see. So with a lot of customers, what I've noticed as well is that they tend to confuse this with mileage payments. So mileage payments, even though you are paying the worker for mileage, that typically does not fix the fact that you're not covering travel time, because mileage is a business expense reimbursement and it doesn't typically count towards the wages in terms of the home office's calculations when they're assessing if the worker has been compliant for that pay period. So for example, paying 45p a mile doesn't typically cover that pay requirement for the time traveled itself. So we've kind of tried to simplify it for you. So the test to apply here would be to take the worker's weekly pay, divide that by every hour actually worked during the week, and also any travel between sites, and then check that that result still clears the rate stated on their clause or national living minimum wage, whichever is higher. And what you'll notice is that when you start doing these calculations, you may notice that even once you've added travel time back in, it doesn't actually level out, because it actually brings the cause rate much lower, because it kind of dilutes the annual rate overall, which could lead to a potential breach. And also, typically when a home office does conduct their audits, pay slips are something that they definitely look at, especially with the recent changes that took effect in April. So it's really important that your rotas, your timesheets are all recorded and accurately reflecting the travel time between calls, and it's not just an assumed or an average figure, basically. Perfect. Matt, if you could move on to the next slide. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about time awake and sleep in shifts as well. This is another area that I typically get a lot of questions on a daily basis from our customers as well. So since the 2021 Supreme Court ruling here, they've concluded that basically only time that the worker is awake and actually working counts towards your sleep-in time, and that counts towards the minimum wage, and permitted sleep time doesn't actually count. So what this means is that a flat sleep-in fee or a sleep-in rate on someone's payslip could look fine on paper, but once you've actually done the calculations and divided the hours, it once again dilutes the worker's salary overall, because what the home office will see when they're trying to calculate if your payslip is compliant and if that worker has cleared that pay period is that the basic rate on the payslip should reflect the hours actually worked, and ideally it should reflect what stated on their clause in terms of their contracted hours. So what happens here, and the part that usually catches sponsors out, is that their records and their timesheets and rotas don't actually reflect when the worker gets up in the night and potentially deals with something, and if that time isn't logged, there's no way to actually evidence that that rate itself has been met. So this is why it's really important that in your contracts, it clearly classifies what is counted as sleep-in time, what's counted as travel time, and that your timesheets and your rotas, particularly for the care industry, are accurately reflecting the hours worked and what each worker has done throughout that hourly period as well. So I would say if your sleep-in rates haven't been reviewed since 2021, now that the Supreme Court has had this ruling, it'd be really important to do an audit of all of your files and your rotas to just make sure that everything is accurate as well moving forward. Perfect. Okay. So now we'll be talking about weekend and night premiums, night premium shifts. So this is also a common area that I think trips up a lot of our employers and just our customers generally. If you are paying a basic rate during the week and then enhanced rates for the night shifts or weekends or potentially unsocial hours where the worker is a live-in carer, it's really tempting to think that the higher rate will balance out or average out the lower ones. And this isn't necessarily true, because typically what the home office do is that HMRC and the home office, in terms of how they measure compliance, they measure it based on the lowest contractual rate, not a blend of different things that are categorized on your payslip. So paying a basic rate throughout the week and then enhanced rates for night times or weekends don't typically average out when they're calculating it towards that pay period assessment. So the basic rate itself on the payslip is what they're using, and that alone, without any other calculations, should clear whichever floor is the highest, whether it's national living minimum wage or whatever stated as per their clause and the occupation code. So topping up with premiums or unsocial hours for weekends or night shifts doesn't actually rescue where a basic rate has fallen below what's stated on the clause or whatever the applicable floor is. And I would say that this principle applies for sponsored roles as well, because it's really important to just preface that the basic rate is what the Home Office is looking at. So I think there was a question earlier as well as to whether statutory sick pay counts and whether that counts towards what the Home Office is looking at. So with that, there are permitted exceptions where the Home Office does allow your salary to drop below the required rate, but that has to be reported, and that in itself does not exempt you from paying the flat rate for weekend and night premium shifts. So that those exceptions don't typically apply here, and that's more related to a permitted exception where the worker has a valid reason for being paid below the cause rate, basically. Perfect. Matt, if you could move on. Okay, amazing. So now we're just going to cover the subtle ways that that your salary can drop below the required threshold, and these are certain things that sometimes go unnoticed because, again, it's not intentional, and it's usually just how a pay slip is structured and just things that add up in terms of the employer's costs. So firstly, uniform and PPE. So charging staff for a kit or for their uniform can potentially pull them below the effective rate, whichever floor is applicable to them. And it's usually a common trigger that I find in audits as well, where I'll notice on pay slips that they've been charged or there are reimbursements for uniform or just kits in general, and employers don't realize that counting that actually drops the worker below the required rate. And the same applies for any salary sacrifice schemes, so any pension schemes, cycle to work, childcare vouchers, all of this, if calculated, if you're using that as a way to top up that worker's basic pay, that will actually bring the worker below the floor, which can be a cause of concern in terms of the Home Office as well. The same would apply to accommodation. So if you provide a housing charge more than the daily offset, which I believe is £11, £11.10 per hour, I believe, that also will eat into the compliance pay and also potentially could drop the worker below the required threshold for that pay period, depending on the pay period applicable. And lastly, unpaid training and induction as well. So technically, any onboarding or any training should count as working time. And if it is unpaid, that could also dilute the worker's salary and bring them below the threshold. So it's really important to monitor any of these. And if you think this is a cause of concern, I would definitely do an audit of your workers. And if you've noticed that there have been any underpayments historically, it's really important to fix that through back paying the workers or reporting changes of circumstances, depending on what the individual situation is there, to ensure that if there is a genuine reason as to why the worker has been paid below the salary, that's reported. And if it was an error or a clerical error, that's fixed moving forward in terms of back paying the worker as well. Perfect. Matt, if you could, amazing. Okay, so now we're going to talk through a live example. So here a care worker is being paid $12.71 per hour for contact time. And on paper, that's national living minimum wage. That looks fully compliant. However, if you realistically add what that worker is doing throughout the working day, for example, if they're traveling back and forth to clients' homes, then travel time should be paid. And when you're including travel time and doing that calculation as well, that can dilute the worker's pay, and that would effectively bring them lower than the threshold. And here, for example, we've added uniform deduction as well across for this worker. So applying the calculations that we've included previously, if we were to divide the actual pay by the actual hours worked, including travel and any other things that are itemized on the payslip, the effective rate would essentially land around 11.60 per hour, which is below not only national living minimum wage, but also the minimum rate for the occupation code, depending on when this worker's cause was assigned. So here, it's a clear example of where it's obvious where a sponsor has not intentionally tried to underpay the worker, but it's just the fact that there are all these other things that can dilute a worker's pay, and sometimes that does go unnoticed. And especially with the April changes, it's really important to make sure that pay slips are itemized correctly. Any time that should be paid for is paid for and is clearly stated on the pay slip, so that when the Home Office are assessing the pay period, you're ensuring that all workers are passing the relevant pay periods as well. Perfect. And now we're on to this slide. So I know that all of this has been a lot of information in this section. So what we've done is we've basically tried to simplify everything for you. So everything that we've talked about here in terms of travel time, sleep-ins, premiums, any deductions, we've basically kind of compartmentalized everything into one single free checklist for you. So this is updated based off the guidance changes in 2026, and it outlines all of the risks that I've just covered, as well as what you should be doing moving forward. So we're just going to leave this on the screen for a few minutes, and if you want to scan it, feel free to do so. And I think this is probably one of the most important takeaways from today. So yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Lena. Yeah, really encourage everyone to scan the checklist there. So just point your phone at the QR code on the screen there. That's going to take you directly to the checklist, which, as Alina says, is a really handy summary of all the information we've conveyed already. A lot more detail in there. Of course, we've only really scratched the surface or the tip of the iceberg in terms of the pay complexity here. So really encourage everyone to download that checklist. And you're also going to find when you go to the checklist page on the Borderless website, you're going to find a lot of other handy checklists too. How to pass an audit if you're the authorizing officer, how to make sure that you are following and discharging your duties correctly. A number of really handy checklists available to you there as well. So really encourage everyone to do that. Great. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the business impact of the pay period changes and how you should be thinking about changing your processes accordingly off the back of some of these changes that we've seen. So, of course, as Alina's just been talking about, pay is now checked every pay period, not as an annual average, not over some look back window. And of course, you can't use weaker months, different months to offset each other. It's important that every single pay period, of course, is valid. And of course, if you're paid more than monthly, then there are rules around a period of 12 weeks over there as well. So it's really looked on a per pay period basis, every period, making sure that you are meeting the rules there. And I think that's really the thrust of our message today, making sure that you can't really expect you to be able to make it up. All of that information is shared directly from HMRC to the Home Office on an automatic, ongoing basis, and they are flagging information proactively in the system where things are not compliant. This also touches the Fair Work Agency too. So they are pulled into minimum wage enforcement from April 2026. We've seen that body start to get more involved in everything, and so a lot more scrutiny on things as well. And that's exactly why businesses are facing increased audits, why we're seeing a lot more sponsor license revocations, is because the government now has a lot more information and data to be able to surface, to triage, and to essentially act upon as well. So if you're running payroll systems, if you can see it, then a good rule of thumb is that the government can see it too. So make sure that everything is really, really compliant and tied together. And as I mentioned before, this really shows very starkly the number of sponsor license revocations year over year. So over the last 5 years, we've gone from 294 sponsor license revoked to 517 in 2022, 726 in 2023, 1,600 in 2024, 3,100 in 2025. Based on the data we have from Q1, we're projecting about 6,200 by the end of the year. So help me with the maths, but it's basically roughly double each year for the last 3 or 4 years. So revocations really, really up, and that places a lot of scrutiny on sponsors to make sure that they are following the rules correctly, making sure that particularly pay is really, really well validated. So that, and just to really reiterate that, sponsored, that single underpayment period, that's a compliance breach. What can happen if it becomes a significant issue? Your sponsor license, its A rating, can be downgraded to a B rating, or someone on an action plan, and then you'll have to engage with the government. It's a very drawn out process to get that back up to an A rating. So we really recommend trying to avoid getting in that situation in the first place. More significant impacts can be sponsor licenses, suspensions, and revocations, which has impacts, of course, on your sponsored workers, curtailment of their visas. And then, of course, if the sponsor license is suspended or revoked, suspended, you won't be able to send any new sponsorship offers, and revoked, your entire sponsored workforce is no longer legally allowed to be employed, cannot work for you immediately, and so obviously pretty devastating consequences for both you as a business and for those individuals, of course, as well. So that's why compliance is really this critical duty that you must have the right processes in place for. So this is really our message. It's around how to get proactive with pay audit processes. So how to catch some of these things early. I'll share a bit more about how Borderless can help in this regard in a second. Here's are some of our recommendations, what we would typically work with companies in terms of their audits. Thinking about the actual hour people worked, including travel time, including training, as Alina's articulated, and you can do some calculations off the back of that to ensure that you're meeting those minimums required for sponsorship. Sleep-ins, counting time awake, working from the logs, deductions, salary sacrifice, all of that changes the net amount that can be charged and offset against gross salaries. Divide that eligible pay by the total hours to get the real, true, effective rate of pay. And then check it clears the higher of the minimum wage and the going rate, as Alina's identified. And then making sure you're doing this on an ongoing basis is really, really key. Documenting the fact that you've self-audited yourself is that evidence to make sure that you are doing everything correctly. Now, of course, there's a lot in that, and doing that on a manual basis every month, every pay period for a significant number of sponsor workers can, as you can imagine, become really quite an error-prone, quite a tedious process. And that's exactly why we've built part of the Borderless system. Now, this is the payslip system. Essentially, it allows you to upload payslips directly to Borderless, and this is going to run all this logic for you. So it's going to check these pay windows. It's going to work out based on all the information it's provided, and it's going to give you a picture of your compliance position. So it's going to proactively flag and identify issues with potential pay right from the get-go. So it's going to validate pay before COS is assigned against the salary thresholds and also the going rates, of course, because we know that minimum salary based on the occupational code. It's going to monitor worker pay on a rolling basis, and it's going to be flagging those trends before they become compliance breaches, making sure that you have all of that auditability within the system, and making sure that it's appropriately sorted into the categories which is eligible, which shouldn't be going forward. And it's going to, of course, in general, guide you for all of the mandatory changes, reporting, fixing pay before the Home Office becomes involved. So a little bit of a preview of what the payslip module on Borderless can do to help your business maintain its sponsored worker pay. And we're really proud in general. This is a statistic we have from 90 days into Borderless. What's the average compliance score of a business that starts working with Borderless? About 55% from the beginning. That's rising to 95% across all of our companies within 90 days of using Borderless. So we're really proud, a metric that we're really proud of, helping businesses essentially double their compliance score, get really, really compliant using Borderless to fix those gaps and issues before they emerge in the first place. And this is a quote from one of a business that we support called StackFix, employing sponsored workers, using spreadsheets to manage their compliance position, reliant on going to that spreadsheet for that reminder. Of course, that relies on the business remembering to do that, checking to do that, updating the spreadsheet with all of that immigration logic, and they're using Borderless to make sure that everything is managed and maintained in one place completely consistently, and proactively identifying them about issues before they become real issues with the Home Office. So I'm going to give you a quick view of the compliance radar. So I'm going to play a video now of a new product we've just launched, which is going to share a bit more about how we can really help the business get compliant.
Hey everyone, Tom here from Borderless. I'm really excited to show you our new compliance product, Halo. Halo gives you a view of all of your compliance gaps, alerts, risks in a single place within the Borderless platform. You can see your compliance score, workers by status, any document compliance gaps, your remaining COS, including the expiry date, any changes that you need to report, and you can see your individual compliance gaps per document. We're going to give you specific actions in here to fix these compliance gaps. So for example, let's take a look at our employment details. If any of your individuals are missing a job description, or that job description perhaps doesn't match what we have on the COS, we will extract information from all of the COS documents for those individuals. We'll then play that back to you, and you'll be able to choose whether you'd like to keep the current job description you have or use the one that has been extracted from the COS. You can also perform an audit on an individual level as well. So if we click to do an audit, we'll again extract information from the COS, show you what you've got on Borderless versus the COS, and give you the option to update. We can take a look at things like payslips, for example. If we've got payslip gaps on individuals, you have the option to upload individually, or you can do a bulk document upload. This will take you into our smart document uploader. Just upload all of your documents in here. We'll classify the documents by type, we'll match them to the individual, and then we'll flag to you any issues that we found. Now, if you report a change in the Borderless platform, Borderless is now going to say to you, this is a change we think you need to report. And to stay compliant, you need to report that within 10 working days. You can go in and edit that date of change, provide full information to us, click to submit that report. That will go to the Borderless team and will then submit to the Home Office. The other great feature of Halo is the ability to use the time machine. So you can fast forward 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, and forecast your compliance position related to expiring or missing documents. We're adding loads of great features to Halo over the next few weeks, so please stay tuned for more updates. Thank you.
Great. I hope that gives you a little bit of a sense of one aspect of how Borderless can help you with your compliance position there. So if you'd like to learn a little bit more, then do encourage you to reach out to the Borderless team. So that's exactly how you can do. Reminder here, a few different resources for you. On the left-hand side, if you want to use our salary calculator validation logic, that's the left-hand QR code. That's going to drop you straight onto a calculator on the Borderless website. That's going to be able to you're going to be able to use to understand minimum pay, rates, etc. All of that information. If you'd like to speak directly to Borderless about questions that you have on sponsored worker pay, to understand a little bit more about Borderless, the payslip module, how Halo can help you improve your overall compliance position, then that's the right-hand QR code. You just scan that, you put your first name, last name, email, a couple of other details, and you can actually directly book a time to speak to Borderless this afternoon, later in the week. It's going to drop you straight in with one of our colleagues, and you'll get an invite to join the meeting there. So that's the slides that information we have today. I'm going to hand over to Alina. I don't know if there are some questions, Alina, that you'd like to pick up on. I can see quite a few questions in the chat.
Hi. Okay. Sorry, I was just about to answer a question. There's a question here from Linda. What about waiting time between clients? What if the carer chooses to go home between calls? So from a skilled worker compliance point of view, what matters that what the Home Office will be looking at is whether the carer is genuinely free during that break or gap. So it's not typically how they choose to spend it. It's whether the worker is technically on call or if that would be logged as a break on the timesheet. So if the gap is realistically long enough where the worker has no obligation to remain available and isn't expected to be on standby for their role, they're free to use that time as they wish. So that means that that period, typically, if they are going home, wouldn't count as paid working time, even if they choose to go home or just have a break in the office. That would be treated more likely as a rest or a break and a genuine gap between shifts. Where it becomes a potential compliance issue is if that break isn't really free and they're meant to be on call or they're expected to potentially attend to a service user if that service user needs, then it would be counted as working time and that technically wouldn't be a break. So it depends on how the contract is worded and how your rotas are structured as well. So with a lot of the questions that I'm getting as well, they are quite specific in terms of live-in care packages or travel time and how different travel time is structured across different organizations. And with this topic, like I said, it is quite complex. So if there are specific situations, I would say it's really best to reach out to our team so that we can have a look and try to understand the calculations of how your business does it so that we can see if that's effectively diluted the hourly rate that you're paying the workers as well. There was another question here from Maxine. Salary sacrifice. Can you give an example on how a provider could get caught on this? So just a quick example that I gave Maxine. Here, a care worker whose cause was assigned pre-July 2025 changes is currently being paid according to National Living Minimum Wage, which is $12.71 per hour, based on a 40-hour week. So that equals out to about £508 per week. And they themselves have enrolled into a salary sacrifice pension where they're sacrificing 5% of their weekly income. So that would be calculated around to £25 per week. So applying the calculation that we showed in the previous and earlier slides, dividing that figure by 40 hours, the effective hourly rate basically drops from 12.71 per hour to 12.07, which is below national living minimum wage, and that's the floor that is applied here. So that's typically how the Home Office would calculate it in an audit. So it's really important to make sure that whatever could potentially dilute the worker's salary, you're calculating that after the fact to make sure that the hourly rate is not diluted at all and that the floor is still applied there. So that's just a quick example that I worked up for Maxine. There's also another question here from Pam. What if staff ask for unpaid leave as they've used more of their holiday? So with unpaid leave, the Home Office guidance is clear that a worker can be absent on unpaid or reduced pay for more than 4 weeks, for less than 4 weeks in any calendar year. And if it is more than 4 weeks, that would need to be reported to the Home Office within 10 working days. And typically what the Home Office would expect is that the sponsors would have to stop sponsoring the worker in these situations unless one of the exceptions apply. So the exceptions would be statutory maternity leave, paternity leave, or any type of parental leave. Sick leave, so that I think that answers, I think it was Victor's question before about statutory sick pay. So that would be a permitted exception as well. Amongst other exceptions, attending jury service, attending court as a witness, or taking part in a legally organized industrial action. And if it doesn't fall within these exceptions, then the sponsor would normally have to stop sponsoring the worker. And also, it's really important to note that if it does fall within these exceptions and it has not been reported to the Home Office, that is also a cause of concern and could be picked up by the Home Office during an audit. And it could be raised as an area of non-compliance as well. So it's really important to make sure that if you are, or if any workers are being paid below their cause rate or whichever floor applies, that you're reporting this as soon as the change happens to the Home Office and that you're keeping track of it, essentially. Perfect. There's another question here from Bilou. Does the pay rise for existing cause staff if the Home Office changes it? So here what I've basically said is that if your cause was assigned pre-July 2025 changes, that means that that hourly rate still stands until you're looking to assign a new cause. However, with the national living minimum wage changes, that means that they would need their applicable floor would be the national living minimum wage floor because their cause was assigned before the new hourly rate of 12.82 has been applicable for carers and senior carers. However, if your cause was assigned after the 22nd of July 2025, then the applicable rate here would be the cause rate because that would be 12.82 per hour and is higher than the national living minimum wage, basically. Let's see, other questions. Okay, a question from Rashiwi. Is it okay for staff to do less hours 1 week and then more in another week as long as they reach 150 hours per month? So with this, so the new changes in April have basically kind of made this harder for employers. So where pay usually could have been averaged out over an annual basis, it now is monitored according to the pay period. So depending on how often your workers are paid, you would need to ensure that if they're doing less hours 1 week and they're making it up the following week, that still would not bring them lower the required rate for that pay period. So that means, for example, if your workers are being paid monthly, what the Home Office would do is that they would check pay slips according to a quarterly pay period. So that means on a 3-month rolling basis. So you would need to check that for that pay period, even though the worker has worked less hours 1 week, it averages out over that pay period. So it's really important to monitor the pay period because, like I said, where pay could be averaged out previously over an annual basis, that doesn't apply moving forward. Perfect. Can a carer be paid? I'm assuming that, sorry, this question from Linda, can a carer be paid? What if your cause is being paid more? So if a worker is being paid above their cause rate, that is fine. Usually that's a good thing because then when they're calculating the pay period assessments as well, they'll see that the worker is above their cause rate, but it's just important to make sure that the worker is being paid for the contracted hours that they're working as well. And that usually with pay increases, the Home Office guidance does state that that does not need to be reported as a change of circumstance. However, if the worker's pay is being reduced, that would need to be reported within 10 working days. So it's just important to keep note of that.
Great. Thanks, Lena. Any final questions you wanted to pick up, or
I think we've covered most patterns, but I note that there are some questions that I've not been able to answer, but that's usually because they are quite specific and we would need more context and just understanding on your sleep-in or live-in arrangements there. So if you do have more specific questions, feel free to book in with us and we can give you more specific tailored advice as well.
Excellent. Well, that's the material we had here from Borderless today. I wanted to thank everyone for joining today's webinar session. Just as a reminder, if you do want to speak to the Borderless team, that's the QR code on the right-hand side. Pick a time that suits you best, and you'll be able to book in directly with the Borderless team to get those questions answered. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We'll see you again very soon on the next Borderless webinar. If you do have a moment after the webinar session, we would love your feedback on how today's sessions went. So it'll take about 5 or 10 seconds. It's going to pop up. And if you just let us know how we did, anything else you'd like to see on the sessions, then that's really useful for us for the next time around. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your afternoon and rest of your week. And we'll see you very soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.